This is a panel discussion on the mining law for the heavens and the depths of the seas. And what I just want to go around the table and have the participants identify themselves that will be participating in the discussion. So we'll start over here.
Andrew Woods, I'm a law professor here at the University of Arizona.
Stephen Fleming, a vice president in the research office here at University of Arizona and a lifelong space geek.
Rob Risley, I'm Exploration Counsel for Freeport-McMoran.
Harrison Schmidt, Apollo 17 astronaut and former professor, or adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin.
John Wiltshire, Ocean and Resources Engineering, University of Hawaii.
Somebody's got to start.
Let me ask, can I ask a question to the group? We're done. When will law first play a major role in the space mining industry? What event will trigger people to suddenly really care about the law?
Well, I just mentioned to John at the break that I think we're going to have an alternative to discovery. And that may be the main thing that we're going to have to talk to Washington about. Because the discovery essentially has occurred. We know enough from orbital as well as lunar samples to say where the probable resource areas will be. And so you're going to need something to go with a claim regime that probably substitutes verification for discovery. Whereas there has to be enough investment into establishing that indeed the resource is there at these rough concentrations and with these kind of mining parameters. And frankly, that just came when listening to your call. I've made a note to myself that we have to do that because discoveries occur.
And I would extend that to say that it shouldn't just be, it can't be remote verification. I think you actually have to either put a boot or a claw of a robot touching it and saying, we've sampled this physically and validated that this material is there. Because otherwise you can just say
well, but that's why I say discoveries occur.
Yeah, we already know it's there.
Yeah.
Because I know places of interest, and that, but I can't claim. I don't think I can.
You shouldn't be allowed to just circle it on a map and say, we think there's ice here. That's my ice. You should have to go there and plant a stick.
I think it needs to be part of a much larger thing that as I said, a claim regime that establishes some of the kind of things you've already talked about and that developed hundreds of years ago. In that you have to, there's a certain area that's involved. There's a certain time frame in which things have to happen, or you no longer have that claim.
Just to be clear, so you're saying that it's a financing requirement, right? Somebody would not lend the money to an operation unless they had some kind of guarantee, a legal guarantee, that they weren't going to be jumped, basically.
I think that's part of it. Plus, it's a way to prevent conflict.
Right.
If you have a claim regime, then you prevent conflict.
But the other
Doesn't
way,
mean you prevent court cases, but you prevent, I think, conflict.
Say you had a major IPO by a company getting very large amounts of public investment on the stock exchange. Well, then those stockholders are going to want some assurance that they've invested in something. Otherwise, your IPO isn't going to go.
yeah. But what if they've just invested if I invest in Uber as opposed to investing in Lyft, we are both investing in the future promise of maybe someday a profit that's premised really on who can get, profitable fast enough. It's an arms race. It's a fundraising race, but it's market driven.
Management marketing issue rather than, is there a resource that I can actually develop and get money back from in a legal way?
Well, that's one way to think about it, but the other way some people think about those businesses is a race to automation. The prices they charge now are not sustainable with human drivers, but if they become automated drivers, then they are sustainable. And so I'm an investor and I'm just gambling on which one's going to win. But it's not based on any legal claim. It's really just who gets there first.
Well, I think you have to distinguish between the angel investor mentality and the public investor mentality.
And both Uber and Lyft are legal. I mean, once they get there,
Right.
either of them is not gonna get shut down because they don't have a claim or they're doing something that is legally not sustainable.
And presumably a credible effort could attract an angel investor just with the discovery we already have.
Yeah.
But I think to be legitimately able to attract public investment, you're gonna have to have that verification stage, which doesn't really, to some degree exists in mining law in the United States,
Yeah,
or
I
has
think-
existed in that discovery was related to actually identifying
You were-
in
Yeah,
two
and
different
Because you-
kinds
because
of
you-
claims.
you were on the
Let
ground,
me
so-
explain my take on this, because I think that when you look at the mining law in the United States, it says that you can't locate a claim before you've made a discovery. The question is, what do we mean by discovery?
Right.
The law says until you've discovered the vein or lode. And so what it's saying is that once you have a discovery of that geologic structure, that you locate a mining claim. Now, I think that the only time that value really comes in is at the time that you go for patent. In other words, if you look at the language of the law, the first time the word valuable comes in is a making application for patent. So I think that the mining law in the United States makes a lot more sense if you look at the discovery as applied to a structure that people can justify spending their money or their time with the hope of developing a valuable mine.
But in the Mexican law you talked about from 500 years ago, there was a physical limit. It was 40 by 80
Right.
units, so it's a
Yeah,
football
and
field.
it's the same
But
thing on the mining
is-
law, and I think that that's been one of the criticisms of industry of the mining law, is that we're looking at too limited an area and what we need to do to expand the area of control. Now, when you're looking at that control, the idea truly is how much control do you need to actually develop the resource that you think is there, as opposed to trying to keep out all your competitors. And so there is an element of development required to fully identify the mineralization that you hope is there.
So what will bring the law into space exploration or mineral exploration in space? And I'm not sure I have a lot of confidence that we can build something prospectively. And that has not been the historic precedent. I think we bring the law into mineral exploration in space with the first dispute. And the law has always developed in the context of disputes, in the context of cases. And to your point, you know, how do we assure that the Outer Space Treaty is interpreted in the correct way? The U.S. goes in and does it, right?
Well, I think that's the best way to get it started.
And then
We
there'll
may
be a
end up with
dispute.
But
And then we start to develop the law from
you
there.
know, there's a part of northern Tranquilitatis where I would locate a claim today if there was a claim regime.
I'll write that down.
Latitude and longitude?
And I would then try to get funding for a verification mission to that area as well as to an area that may well be very good, but I don't have the kind of data I need to say that yes, the resources there are not there, at least in order to attract an investor.
My concern about trying to build a law prospectively is we wind up with something like the law of the sea, which, you know, I sat there, it sounded like a nightmare to me. I mean, it was just like my worst nightmare.
It's like if you went to a restaurant, your favorite restaurant, and as you're walking out the door, the guy says, oh, by the way, there's a $10 surcharge. And you go, what's this $10 surcharge for? And he goes, oh, that's to subsidize the failing restaurant next door. It's like that.
So the dispute you're describing could come in a bunch of different contexts, right? It's
Sure.
not just the treaty. So one concern would be that an American entity or an entity leaving the U.S. goes, with authorization from the U.S. government, goes up, and then a Chinese entity disputes something.
The border dispute.
Yeah, but there's also just potential property disputes under, classic common law rules of capture between two entities operating under the same domestic authority. So here in the States, two companies seeking the same, you and Harrison seeking the same claim. And, again, I'm not sure, if discovery can't be relied on as the first way to hook a claim, is verification the way to do it? Why would it make sense to pin it on verification instead of possession? Why not just say whoever first grabs an actual substantive piece of ore has a claim?
But I think the question really is, how much can you grab?
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that is gonna depend on, for example, we've talked about helium-3. I mean, how much land are you gonna really need to exert or exercise rights of possession over to have an economic?
My estimate is 10,000 square kilometers.
Yeah.
You see in that-
And how many places in that 10,000 square kilometers should you have to plant a flag before you can claim it?
Well, that's what's difficult, because let me give you an example of something I was involved in as a student when I was at Caltech. I was hired by a consultant for U.S. Steel to examine a discovery in southeastern Alaska. That discovery was by flying magnetic magnetometers.
Yep.
And there were magnetic anomalies that U.S. Steel thought represented the location of new iron ore. But we located the claims on the basis of the anomalies, because in areas you couldn't see anything. You were locating on what the magnetic anomaly was.
That's a really good point, because if you're talking about basing property rights on discovery or verification, that ignores the reality that you got to go out and do exploration before you have a discovery or before you can verify anything. And under the 1872 law, we've expanded the idea of discovery to allow people to stake a lot of claims based on an anomaly, a magnetic anomaly, for example. And then we have years to go out there and actually
And in fact,
prove
I think we were locating placer claims,
With-
because
with
there was no vein. I think we were allowed under law to locate placer claims rather than the smaller what do we
load
call them?
claims.
The load.
Load claims.
Yeah, well, it is a real difficulty in applying modern exploration technology to, what's on the ground. So if you have a magnetic anomaly or some form of geophysical anomaly, I think that indicates some, difference in the Earth's structure there, but I think you really don't know what it is until you put a drill in the ground.
Yeah, but the analogy I'm trying to give is that in the case of the moon now, we have data much like a magnetic anomaly on which you could, in some way, establish some early precedents for
But there
that
must
claim.
be an analogy, sorry to interrupt, there must be an analogy, there must be examples in mining where there's publicly available survey information. And so everyone is working from the same level of pre-discovery. And so, in which case, I'm sure, I don't know, you would know, the regime says you have to go beyond what the public knows to have invested in the claim, to do your own discovery, is that?
Yeah, no, that's true in the context of the mining law.
Right.
The mining law says that you need to have some sort of physical exposure of your mineralization in order to establish a valid claim. That's not true in the oil and gas business, where the geologic information can give you sufficient information to say that you have a known oil and gas resource. And so under those circumstances, they've gone to a leasing system wherein within those known areas there's a bidding process whereby you can acquire rights to exploit the oil and gas within that area. And so I don't know if we're talking about the potential of looking at at this type of a bidding process to establish mining rights within a known area. But
It's an interesting possibility.
as I see it, the problem is that that information that you have, how's it acquired? And how is it distributed? Do you have qualifications to be able to acquire that information, and you buy it?
Frankly, we probably have more information about the moon right now than some of these lease sales have about the area in which you can bid on a lease.
Actually,
For oil and gas, that is.
Yeah.
I worked a situation for Noranda Mines, now part of Vale, which is exactly what you said. There was a publicly available aeromagnetic map. The company wanted to go in on the basis of that and stake the area, but they had to send in boots on the ground, which was me. And we went into this area to look at it, and it turned out that it was a very, very densely wooded area with huge terrain changes that you couldn't see properly from the air. And when they had run the aeromagnetic over the area, they had not properly corrected for these outlandish, invisible from the air terrain changes, so that what showed up as magnetic anomalies were in fact hilltops, and there was nothing to stake at all. So we
Well,
basically
that's a little like what
had
we-
false
That's what-
aeromagnetic data.
That's comparable to what we encountered in southeast Alaska, where they had these huge anomalies, but it turns out that they were dikes within some structures in ultramafic rocks that had apparently cooled and become polarized. And the polarized dikes were giving these large anomalies. We didn't know it at the time, but at the same time, we did go in and locate claims just on the basis of the magnetic anomaly.
But-
Later on, we discovered why we had an anomaly.
But how, if you're working from that sort of data, how big a claim are you allowed to stake? I mean,
Well,
is
the normal size of the placer claim was what, 600 by 1,500 or something like that?
Well, you've got the individual placer claims are 20 acres, which are 660 by 330, but or I'm sorry,
That's the low
it's
claim.
1320 by 660. But there is a possibility of staking what's called association placer claims that are a quarter section, 160 acres. If you have 8 people involved in that type of claim staking. But I think that simply illustrates that the claims that we have under the existing mining law are really too small for the types of deposits.
Yeah,
that people are
that's why I
seeking.
think another claim regime is supposed to be, should come about
Yeah.
for this, particularly to have a viable long-term resource for Helium 3, for example. You need about 10,000 square miles.
But-
You're talking about 2 square kilometers a year being mined for 1 power plant. Well, you need.
But let's be careful with scale. One thing we didn't talk about when I was talking about the permanently shattered craters, right next to the permanently shattered craters are the mountains of eternal sunlight. There are peaks, certainly in the South Pole, some in the north, that stick up high enough that they never are shaded. They have sunlight all 28 days of the lunar cycle. We know where they are. We don't need to go to the ground to prove that there's sunlight there all the time. We've discovered that from orbit. But there are very, very few of them, and they're very small. And so if, let's pick China, if China were to put one little rover on each of those peaks, you do that in one decent-sized mission, does that mean that nobody else can ever use them? Because they might not be 20 acres in extent on the peak of that mountain. I hope we're not using acres on the moon. I hope we're using something else. But we might. But what? Because those are truly unique resources. I mean, there's a lot of moon out there, but there's some very, very specific, unique resources. And is that going to be finders keepers? That the first person to get on that peak with a solar cell says it's mine. You can't have it.
Well, I think that really illustrates what we're talking about in terms of the difference between the initiation of some form of a claim and the responsibility to develop that property. I think that one of the difficulties that we've had in the mining industry is the fact that a lot of resources that have not been adequately developed or explored, people simply have been sitting on them, hoping to, the next company that comes along, they want to be able to sell that.
Right.
So I think that's why we need to come up with an element of required development work that really illustrates the extent of a mineralized zone. Now, I think that when the mining law was first passed, $100 a year in development work was a lot of money, because you realize that $100 was 5 $20 gold pieces, so you got $100 equals 5 ounces of gold. That was a considerable expenditure at the time. So I think that we need to think about the context of development responsibilities in that type of context. And of course, that you see the same thing throughout the history of mineral laws, where there is a development requirement.
John, do you think in the case of the moon, it could work to have let's assume it's the United States establishing a claim regime, that there be an initial claim located on the basis of information now available, and but that there would be a time frame in which that initial claim would have to then be verified relative to the resource that was there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you could have a patent claim or a longer time to actually do the work of beginning to mine the resource.
Because
Yeah, once you define what the resource is, that once you have the parameters identified, then I think that you go into a period of time where you're having to raise the money, to be able to go into the development stage. So there's a definite distinction between, exploration, discovery, and switching over to development.
So the cover charge is really high here. That's really the defining thing about extraterrestrial exploration. Before I'm going to put, or be able even to attract financing to go up and actually look on the surface, I'm going to have some sort of exclusive right. So maybe way prior to discovery, I'll look at public data and I decide I want this piece of land. I go to an auction, or if there's no competition, stake it. And then I have so many years to fund some sort of mission there, send instruments, people, look at the surface, maybe look at the subsurface, do some sort of geophysics from a moon satellite.
Basically, you want to have time to do a mill test.
So you're really looking at a tiered tenure
Yeah.
system, an exploration license that then flips over into an exploitation license, with the exploitation license requiring a discovery or verification of a discovery.
Do they have to be exclusive? I mean, why not make it like a hunting license? So the US government could license 3 companies to make significant progress to be verified by the, it'd be like bidding. Maybe they let 3 companies get the exploration license, and then there's a competition among those 3 to win the rights to get exploitation rights.
Yeah, I doubt if that type of proposal would fly very much, because I think that what companies want is some sort of exclusive rights to an area before they're willing to make the type of investment that we have here. The exclusivity seems to be the touchword of the industry, and but I think that also ties back to the requirement for diligent activities.
Yeah.
I think that if you wanted to follow something like that someone would have an exclusive license to go within an area for a period of time, and during that period of time, they need to demonstrate that they have isolated the resource to the extent that they've demonstrated exploitability, for example. Otherwise, it would go open to third parties to come in.
Yeah, it's
The
a gamble
business
to begin
model.
with. That just makes it more of a gamble than I think investors.
The business model is to tie up the resource before you create value.
Yeah, right.
And if you would analogize to
Yeah.
Earth system, you don't want to find a mine and then have to go to the farmers
Yeah.
that hold the surface and negotiate for their potato
Once-
farms,
once
for
they
example,
know
because they're
that
going
you
to
have
be
a mine, right.
really, really expensive
Right.
potato
Right, right,
farms.
right. But again, there's a question, I mean, from the not being a miner and thinking about, you know, there's a preliminary question of whether we want to incentivize this activity at all, right? And if we decided as a nation that we wanted to incentivize it, what would be the optimal licensing structure to incentivize it? And it might mean overall that you have some players that decide they're not going to do it. It's not worth Freeport's time, but Jeff Bezos is crazy enough to do it. And maybe that's good enough. Maybe that's the right, you know, or you get 3 billionaires competing. I don't know. I'm just, you know,
It's worth asking the question, but I think one of the differences is, compared to a hunting license,
yeah,
the capital requirements to go out in the woods and hunt
Right.
is very, very low.
right.
You know,
Right.
you're gonna go hunting whether you bag a deer or not.
Yeah,
The sorts of capital necessary to do this sort of work is so high. When I was in the venture business, I would have said you've got to have some sort of exclusivity,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
we stroke that check.
So movies are really high capital projects, like a $250 million movie, and the way that's managed is a series of options, right? There's exclusive options with directors and the intellectual property to be exploited. Nothing's locked down, but everything is on a 1-year or 6-month temporary option.
We do the same thing in the minerals industry.
Yeah, I figured. So you could do the same thing here, right? I mean, the fear would be, from the government's perspective, we don't want to give somebody an exclusive 10-year license and then have them not launch anything.
Right,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
there's got to be the
What happens
exploitation.
with that exclusive 10-year license, depending on the person's ability or the company's ability to go in and place additional value on that, is that they then turn around and try to option it out to third parties who
Exactly.
are willing to put up that money.
And the other issue there is, I mean, who would you be optioning from?
Yeah.
I mean, would, for example, the US go up and say, we get this half of the moon and now it's open, we'll option it out to people?
Yeah.
I think we would be depending on the private investor
Yeah.
to go up there and actually create some sort of possessory interest that would then substantiate a claim over the mineral resources there.
Let me explore something. Let's say that there is a spot on the moon that looks very favorable for some resource.
Hypothetically.
And
Helium, for example.
yeah,
And northern tranquilitis.
and that the government has defined some kind of claim regime and allows it, based on generally available discovery, allows anybody to put a request in for that claim, to get a temporary claim or on that area. And it could be several people on the same area because it's an obvious discovery. But then the capture begins. Who gets there first to verify that the resource is there? If then the first person who does that then gets the 10-year or 20, I would say 20-year right to then exploit that claim. Does that work?
Well, I think, it seems to me that it depends on, the type of financing that's available or that's set up in the bidding process.
Well, it's not a bid. It's just, hey, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
But you don't get the final full claim until you have verified it, and that gives the incentive to verify. It creates a horse race,
Yeah.
but then somebody's going to eventually win that race by who gets the data first.
Well, and it probably defines on, or it probably depends on how you're going to define the rules that establish your discovery, as it were. And it's, that's when you're gonna get into litigation as to whether or not your definitions are correct.
It may actually come down to, have you established enough verification to attract a certain level of investment?
I think
Maybe
you
that's
need
where it
to
comes from.
consider that, you know, there's a huge amount of risk here. And the first people who go into this are very likely to lose their money. And somehow you've got to factor that in here. I remember talking to one of the Nautilus Minerals guys who did lose all their money. And a few years before this, the guy says, well, you can always tell a pioneer because he's the guy lying face down in the mud with the 3 arrows in his back. And in the case of Nautilus Minerals, that turned out to be exactly true. So that, I mean, you've got to factor in, you know, there's a huge amount of risk here, and a lot of the first people in are going to lose their money. I mean, think of the California gold rush. How many of those guys actually made any money? Not many.
Levi
Most of the
Strauss.
merchants.
Levi Strauss, yeah.
Yeah, no, it really was the merchants that made the money, and I think that the miners were looking at very superficial deposits at that point, and it really wasn't until the lode mining industry came in with the English financiers that people actually started to make money.
But John, going back to your historical work, has there ever been a substantial case of exploring for mineral resources where the land was truly unclaimed, where it didn't belong to the king, it didn't belong to a government, that it was there was no title to that land? Has that, because that's what we have with the moon right now.
Oh, I think mining started in that kind of environment.
Ponce de Leon.
Yeah, I think that the California gold rush is probably as good an example as we have out there,
Okay.
because there was a real question as to, well, the United States had just assumed sovereignty over the land.
Right.
There was no law that defined the rights to the mineralization. The miners are simply going out there as individual prospectors, locating claims, but the real difference here is that you're exploiting placer materials where the miners are simply washing the alluvial gold out of the streams and taking their gold to to the down to the stores or the bars or wherever they're going, but they actually pulled the money out of the ground and put it in their pocket. I think that only worked because it was a superficial deposit and they could get that gold with, not like they didn't take any work to get it, but once they got it, it was theirs, they took it away, and no one interfered with that. Now, I think that, you know, the government in Australia tried to tax that, and that resulted in a riot, and then they backed down eventually. But I think that's a real difference in our situation.
The current analogy has to be deep sea beyond the 200-mile economic zone,
Yeah.
right?
Because-
Which is
because there's-
international
because
waters.
there's no title to that property, so,
Yeah.
right, and as
Tied
we've
to
seen,
that's with the United Nations.
yeah, and as we've seen, that didn't work out so well, so,
It hasn't so far.
so far.
And I mean, it looks to me like there are, from a large mining company perspective, it looks to me like there's so many negatives with that system that the current situation where no major mining company has any interest in this is understandable.
So the diamond mining off the west coast, is that within their 200-mile
That's within
limit?
the 200
So,
miles,
so,
done
so
by
that,
concession
there's
from
clearly
countries.
a governmental entity that
Yeah.
claims control of that, and they're gonna give you a concession, a
It's
license to do
Three
it.
different governments,
Okay.
South Africa, Namibia, and Angola, and each one of those countries has a slightly different mining regime, but they're all very similar to U.S. leases for inshore sand that you can get in the United States. You apply to the Minister of Mines for a specific concession, and you know, sometimes that's awarded by lease sale, but most often it's just a negotiated concession that you have for a certain number of years, and the concessions are relatively small. and then you accumulate various concessions and mine.
So this is another case where the cover charge is really high, because you actually have to build one of these big boats to go out and exploit it. So the concession is awarded before there's any discovery or even any?
Yes, yes, you apply for, they have sales of concessions every so often.
But it's
You
based,
apply for
it's
others.
based on geological analysis
Based
that
on
the,
knowing, I
the
think you
rivers
can-
have deposited
Yep,
diamonds
yep. I
in
think
that
you- I think you
area.
can nominate areas to be included in a lease sale or a concession award. And then the concessions are, much like the US oil and gas regime, actually.
So would that be a better model for, say, the moon? Is,
It has proved to be a very successful model, and in the U.S. oil and gas industry or the U.S. nearshore sand industry, it works quite well.
but in the oil and gas, you actually can fly seismic before you
I
compete for a
think-
lease.
Well, first of all, most of the companies have surveyed most of the areas and have a
Yeah.
pretty good sense of where these river channels are. So they
And then-
know what they're looking for.
Okay.
I think most of them have done the geophysical work before they had a concession. Now, they probably do preliminary geophysical work to ask for areas to be nominated and then do more detailed
I see.
geophysical work before they actually mine.
To me, it sounds really analogous to moon
I
exploitation.
think it is, but say the United States is going to have to say that we're, under the Outer Space Treaty, we can offer these preliminary claims pending verification, however we do it.
Well, they can,
Because we don't have, there's not an exclusive economic zone.
Yeah.
You have to sort of say, this is an exclusive economic zone, we're gonna put a claim in there.
The U.S. has done exactly that for deep sea mining under the Reciprocated
Yes.
States Agreement of '84, I believe it is.
Yeah, it-
Did exactly that
Yeah.
with the deep sea before the law of the sea regime came into full effect. And and then there's some problem with the law of the sea fully acknowledging those, but the U.S. hasn't signed the law of the sea treaties.
the problem with that kind of arrangement is that that's exactly the language that would bother other states. I mean, so the United States has said, go ahead and mine outer space, and what you bring back, launch from the U.S. and bring back to the U.S., property rules will apply, you can keep it. You find diamonds up there, put them in your pocket. But
No,
they,
you'll pay taxes on that.
yeah, sure, there's that, but they can't say, haven't said, and won't say, we will guarantee that China will not jump your claim. Right? They can't say, we will guarantee, convey to you from our property right, a right to you, because they don't want to establish a claim of sovereignty over any piece of it. All they can say is, should there be a dispute over your ownership, you have statutory authorization, you can point to something in court, in an American court, which helps when you have a fight between two actors who are American, or in an American court. But I don't know what you do about the fact if there's claim jumping between an American and a Chinese entity over the same, mine.
I believe during the discussions on the Reciprocating States Agreement that those companies who signed on to that system were guaranteed protection by the U.S. Navy. And basically, if somebody else started mining your claim, that they would be confronted by a U.S. naval vessel.
That's a good
But-
point.
but-
I
but-
can't
but-
remember that.
I
But how
have
do-
to
believe
look
that
up.
was, I don't know if that ever went into the law, but that was certainly discussed.
Yeah, because how does that differ from the U.S. claiming sovereignty over that portion of the ocean? It feels like if you're gonna send a
Because
gunboat,
The U.S. would acknowledge everybody else. There were half a dozen or so nations on this Reciprocating
Saying
States
we're gonna
Agreement,
protect our citizens.
and you can protect your
Right.
citizens.
And,
and maybe it's protecting the citizens, not protecting
Yeah,
the square footage. I mean, at a certain point, I mean, I don't want to get apocalyptic, but, the question of who owns a piece of dirt is determined by who can put an 18-year-old with a rifle on it.
Yeah.
And there's a long history of that. I hope we don't get to that in challenges
Well, I
on
mean,
lunar territory,
I
but.
think you would have to make you would have to include Russia, China, India, Japan, and the other major space countries in that sort of agreement.
I don't think you'll get China in that kind of agreement.
Yeah, they're the ones who worry me.
Yeah.
But,
Well, I
Or
mean,
Russia.
So how many, where technologically, how many people, is it actually, is this just academic? I mean, if Planetary Resources or whoever it is that's ready to go next year, sets off on an exploration mission and comes back and is real quiet about what they found, is there really a risk that someone else is gonna go up and steal what they found?
With China there is.
With the Chinese company?
Yeah, but China has the capability. They could put a person on the moon right now if they put together the right kind of use of the rockets they have. And why they're very methodical, historically as well as currently. And Mike Griffin made that argument 2 decades ago, that even with the capability they had then, they could do it. But it is not easy. I mean, it's a lot easier to put the U.S. Navy somewhere on the oceans than it is to protect your citizens' rights on the moon. Hopefully we won't come to that. But I think, as we've said several times, I think if the United States says this and get some other people to agree, but just the United States could say, this is what we're going to do, and if you can attract the investors to make it happen, go for it.
And you think that
But
there's
you
no?
can't, I don't think, it's gonna be very difficult for the United States to guarantee the safety
Sure.
of those claims in the abstract or individuals.
Have there been high-level discussions between the US and China on this exact issue?
I have no idea,
Yeah.
but I suspect not.
Because I don't see why, obviously with cybersecurity, there's a certain extent to which that's a zero-sum game. We're not making big progress with China negotiating that. But if they have companies that want property claims, and we have companies that want property claims, there might just be a common interest in having a clear,
Except their companies are government.
They're all government, one way or another. Yeah.
well, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
it's
the
all, it's all traceable back to the Chinese army.
But no, I think this has been a very useful discussion in that regard.
Yeah, is there a way of separating, what was the examples in China between, the governmental involvement and a private involvement?
No, not
I
really.
don't think so.
Not really.
Is that simply a function of the nature of the Chinese government?
The Chinese economic system, I would say, more than the government is, you look at what's happening with countries like Huawei, with companies like Huawei building 5G networks. That's basically the Chinese government is building the 5G networks for England and Germany. Is that a good national security decision by England and Germany? I don't think so, but they're doing it. And again, just to reiterate, I think there are a few very unique places, these Eternal Sunshine Mountains, that I think it's quite likely that China will target, putting rovers on each of those and just claiming that's our resource. And these rovers are powered by solar cells, so we're exploiting that resource with solar energy. And if we want to send if they want to send bigger production there later, they can do that. But then if the U.S. said, well, we want to be on the other side of that same peak, they'd say, no, you can't. We claimed it. And
Okay, well, what sort of claim are you talking about, Stephen? I mean, this is, there's a big difference between putting a flag in the ground and actually exploiting a resource. And I think that's, it goes back to the initial claims of sovereignty, just the fact that Columbus, put in the flag of Castile somewhere in
Santo Domingo.
some random island, right?
The claim of sovereignty really doesn't get established until population arrives. and that's the same way in the western United States, just the fact that we claimed it didn't mean anything until the population arrived to the point that you could establish a recognizable government.
But that's where a completely separate line of technology development is going to intersect with the space exploration we're talking about here, is do robots count? And if you have, you know, a number of active, productive robots on a piece of lunar dirt that are producing something, can you claim that that's exploiting a resource and that you have a valid claim, even if you've never had
I
even a
suppose it
person?
depends on what do you mean producing something.
Right.
And just
Well, in this
the-
case, it'd be electricity.
Yeah.
So,
But it's just enough sufficient electricity to run your robot.
or maybe you're running your preliminary regolith extractor for your mining experiment. You know, so you're beaming it down the hill to the crater. There's lots of scenarios we could make up, but the concern is if we, the United States, and some countries that we generally get along with, establish a scheme of managing claims, and some countries don't. Let's not pick on China. Let's pick on Brazil. And if Brazil, doesn't, join that consortium, what authority is there to say yes or no? What you can do?
John, it's a lot of fun to think about this. We've kind of been going back and forth here. I'm curious as to whether the observers have any
I
ideas.
know there's
coming
a
out of
question back here a long time ago, but I don't know if you still are interested.
Well, I had something very basic. If we can establish, let's say we have the claims, and I like the idea of making a claim and then having X number of years to confirm the discovery. But how do we define the claims? Is there a lunar cadastre? How do you state what the location of that claim is in a way that other entities will respect it? And how in the heck do we do that? I guess how in the heavens do we do that for asteroids?
I would just say that for the moon, you have an established, internationally, I would say established latitude and longitude regime that everybody recognizes. I think even the Chinese use, because they use our data. They use our sound. That's how they accomplish their missions, is by using what we make public. Yes, I think you can do that. What I suggested in that book was the 10,000 kilometers was based on a certain latitude, longitude boundaries at the equator, and then you would keep the 10,000 and just change that latitude, longitude boundaries as you go north and south in latitude to keep it. Now, whether that's the right number or not, that's just, I don't know. I think that's something that is worth a lot more study than what I did.
Yeah, it seems apparent that that international cadastral system was established very early, because even on Spence Titley's maps, if you saw the video at lunch, you had markers on that measured off square miles.
I can't remember whether it was the Air Force or the Army, but nevertheless, that system was put in place, well, quite a while back. I mean, it was in the last century anyway. But as far as I know, it's been recognized generally internationally. Now, I can't tell you absolutely the Chinese haven't developed their own, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I think it's replicable enough that people would recognize those claims. We've talked mostly about the moon here today, obviously, but for asteroids, I mean, those are very well tracked. I mean, the largest, pick a number, Tim's gone, but 10,000 asteroids are very well known. Where they are, where they're going. They've got catalog numbers. So now I don't think I should be able to just look in a book and say I want this asteroid. But if I've gone to the effort of putting an orbiter around it, or putting a lander on its surface, and then I do some proving out of the resource there with my robot, I think that's a legitimate point to claim that's I'm going to exploit that. Not that I have sovereignty, but that's an asteroid that I'm gonna exploit, and you should stay away from that one, pick another one. There's lots out there.
Yeah, but under that scenario though, should you be given a certain amount of time to complete that exploitation?
Yeah, and I've heard, I think 20 years, I think makes sense. I mean, 10 is, may take you 10 years to raise the money. So,
Yeah.
so,
Does
yeah.
it make a difference as to what the resource itself is? You know, for example, your snowball up there.
Yeah.
that, you know, how long does it take to start taking the ice away?
Yeah, I think when you start getting into, you know, different lengths of time for different substances, you're gonna find that weird edge case that's, you know, half snowball, half platinum or something. And, you know, then which one applies? I don't know if 20 years is the right number, but I'd like to make it consistent for all the objects.
I very much agree, Stephen. I've never seen a split system work. Some countries, for example, Angola, will have different regimes for precious metals and different regimes for base metals. And it just doesn't work. I mean, copper and gold are always associated. So if you start mining,
You're gonna
Yeah.
find both, right?
I think the military, you know, this is, every time I've ever looked at this space mining, I've thought this is such a dual use problem. You know, like cybersecurity, they're just, you know, 5G telecom hardware is as important to our national security infrastructure as it is to T-Mobile. And space resources are gonna be the same thing, where there's gonna be a big problem, and I don't think it's as easy as saying China's wrong and the US is right. You know, there's, our intelligence agencies, our Defense Department work closely with and you know, exploit access to an American tech sector, which will be used as evidence against any American company as being, you know, connected to some kind of claim of sovereignty, in the same way that any Chinese company that goes up will be accused of being working for the government. So line drawing, you know, what would it mean to be independent of the government and not be acting on behalf of the government's national security interests is going to be a tricky exercise that's worth.
Well, all of this goes back to geopolitics, and that was a big rationale for Apollo.
Yeah.
That was the only rationale for
Yeah.
Apollo. And
Yeah.
we just, scientifically, we exploited the opportunity.
Yeah.
George Low fortunately said that, you know, if you can land on the moon, you can do other things.
Yeah.
And even before Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, he had initiated the development of a Block 2 lunar module, which allowed the last 3 missions to stay up there for 3 days. Could have stayed for 4 if you hadn't carried any payload, any science payload, but it was basically the design reference mission lunar module that Grumman put together right at the beginning of the whole program. So, but geopolitics is there, it always will be. I think it's naive to say it isn't.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Well, I think that, you know, we may very well be coming down to a question of not so much who's going to write the rules, but are we going to have an international institution be able to enforce the rules?
Well, now you're back to the 18-year-old with the rifle,
Yeah.
or the
I
modern
agree
equivalent
that there's
thereof.
Always
Yes,
that possibility,
right.
but I think that, you know, is there a way of getting by the question of the 18-year-old with the rifle?
Well, as we said earlier, or was said earlier, I don't think we ought to massage this too long as a nation. We should just move and see what results. You know, press the system and see what the results, but just decide this is what we're going to do and see how everybody else reacts.
And I think we have enough, you know, draft that if we move in a certain direction, a number of significant spacefaring or potential spacefaring countries will follow us, and that can become a de facto regime. Now,
Yeah.
our Brazilian friends, or, you know, the Chinese, may not follow, and we'll just have to live with that. But I think we can get enough to make it not look like a claim of U.S. sovereignty, and look like, you know, the assemblage of Western nations are doing it this way. The United Nations is hopeless. We won't count on them to do anything useful. And the Chinese will manage. And you know, that probably lasts 100 years. You know, and in 100 years, you know, something else happens. But we could make a lot of money and get a lot of people working off planet under those assumptions, just by doing it. Not waiting and
They
analyzing.
did a backroom deal with China, and didn't advertise it and kept it really low key. I mean, they're really interested in money. They really like money. And as long as they didn't lose any political chips, they did everything very quietly, backroom negotiation. I think you could go a long way with them. You know, I wouldn't write them off.
Well, at least until they think they're ready to really take over the world. They may be ready now.
Yeah.
No, they're not ready yet. They're working on a 500-year plan. So,
Right.
So we can do a lot between now and then. So,
I think that's true.
Any other questions out there?
yeah, audience.
You know, one of the things you're talking about is, okay, there was a question?
Wait, it's a couple. One in the back row and one. I think you were.
Let's take the further.
I think the lady in the back was first.
One of the items that hasn't, or I haven't heard yet, is the possibility of mining asteroids. That there have been companies that have actually tried this, but yet have both ended up in bankruptcies. Is that also a potential for any profitability or establishment of a mining law?
Just to repeat the question, if it's not picking it up in the room, the question really was, you know, how do we treat asteroid mining? And do we have any examples in mining law that might apply to asteroids?
I was an investor in one of those companies. I lost my money. Oops. I think a lot of the principles are going to be the same. You know, it's still going to come down to who can actually exploit that resource. Now, with asteroids, there is an additional complication. There's two fundamental ways of exploiting an asteroidal resource. One is you send out your smelter or whatever your processor is, park it next to the asteroid, and process there. The other is you somehow attach a device to it and you move the asteroid to someplace more convenient to you. The difficulty with that,
Putting in orbit around the moon, for example?
around the moon or around the Earth, or maybe you drop it on New Jersey, and it's a real issue. It's a real issue because
Say that in Tucson.
if you've developed the capability to relocate asteroids within the solar system, that is by definition a weapon of mass destruction, and that is a whole other DoD regime. I mean, you know, the treaty prohibits weapons of mass destruction. They were thinking of nuclear weapons, but what if it's just a rock with a motor on the back? So I think there's other challenges to asteroidal mining, but from a legal regime of who owns it, who can exploit it, I don't think it's going to be a lot different than the moon. I think that it is that same situation where it is currently legally not the territory of any nation state. It's a celestial body, so we are not going to establish national sovereignty over that resource. And so if companies want to go get it, they can go get it and carve pieces off and either bring it back or use it in space. But if you get into moving them around, I think you've just opened up a whole other can of worms.
You brought up an interesting point, indirectly, in that how will the law follow technology? I mean, presumably by the time we get to asteroids, we've already started to exploit the moon. So our initial steps onto the moon may be quite large concessions or licenses, but conceivably in 40, 50 years, you have the equivalent of artisanal mining with small companies, maybe from small countries, going up and exploiting relatively small resources. So that original regime where we've had very large concessions now looks, like big corporate giveaways, right? So then you talk about how, by the time we get to the asteroids, we're going to have a law that was maybe developed for the early stages of exploiting the moon, and will leverage people to make vast claims over asteroids. So somehow it seems to me you need to have some sort of mechanism in there to have the law updated with increases in technology. I happen to think the 1872 law was brilliant, and I'd like to keep it the way it is. But a lot of people feel another way about it.
Yeah, well, I think that you know, the most important part of the general mining law we have in this country is the fact that it is one to define tenure of title. And that's really the most important part of it. I think that the criticisms of the law, there's certain technical criticism that, you know, the law doesn't accomplish its true purposes under certain circumstances, but the most important part was the granting of tenure. Now, I think that the other parts that are added to the law in terms of environmental protection and whatnot is that, you know, that really doesn't need to be in the tenure law itself. But I think that's the point that's most important, and I think that's in essence what we're talking about is how do we define, you know, granting of tenure in the first instance, how is it protected? And so that's why I raised the question, okay, you know, who's going to enforce the rules, and is it going to be simply the strongest entity or some cooperative venture? And maybe our example in the law of this potential law of the sea, maybe that's maybe our institution to enforce the rules.
We had a couple more questions this side, and I can't see that side.
We had some more questions out here?
Yeah, Rory had one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my question is about asteroids as well. Specifically, does discovery become sort of different than would be on the moon? Is it more difficult? Does it require maybe looking at things, methods like spectral analysis and that sort of thing to do discovery, to verification? You guys have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think we're back to you know, a lot of it has been discovered. I mean, we know that Psyche is full of metals that are quite useful, but just because, you know, I say that Psyche is full of metals doesn't mean anything. I think that you need to, you know, send something to it and establish, you know, some on the, can't say on the ground, but on the rock, proof of that. This is the verification that we talked about. So I think that's going to be key. You have to make some sort of investment other than, you know, reading a catalog of saying, yep, we've gone there, we've done something, and we now have started the clock on our 20-year, 25-year, whatever license to exploit that. So.
Yeah, we can take the Bennu example,
Mm-hmm.
that where we were sending out a vehicle to orbit an asteroid, land on the asteroid, take a sample of the material.
Bring it back.
And bringing it back.
That counts.
Yeah.
That counts. So if OSIRIS-REx were being run by a private enterprise, that could start a claim, I would argue. Yeah. Don't let Dante
I
hear
just
that.
add that the reason I don't talk about asteroids anymore, I have hard enough time putting together the business case for the moon. Asteroid business case is a lot tougher, as you discovered.
Well, and one of the real issues with an asteroid business case, and the reason that I'm more bullish on the moon, is back to my comment that you need somebody to whack something with a hammer every so often. And life support on a mission to and from an asteroid, unless it happens to be one of the near-Earth ones like Bennu, is a lot more challenging than life support on a lunar mission. You know, one of the things that I wouldn't like to see it happen, but one of the things that is encouraging about a lunar mission is if something horrible goes wrong, you know, you pull the big red lever, and you are in Bethesda Naval Hospital in 3 days. And if you're out in the asteroid belt, you're dead.
Unless you have to go through a gateway.
Don't start on me.
Takes a few more days.
The toll booth. You have to go through a toll booth.
Another thing about asteroids, you know, the moon has enough gravity to help you. Asteroids have so little gravity that they hurt you. And if you try to whack an asteroid, you better be tethered.
Yeah, yours are whacked the other way. And that's actually, we kind of touched on that. I mean, one of the interesting questions about all of this is you go from scientific exploration to actual resource exploitation on a large scale. Dr. Smith, you talked about this. There's a huge amount of just good, solid engineering work that has to be done. I mean, you know, metals weld together in vacuum. So, you know, what do you do with moving parts? You know, how do you make all of this work in an environment where the dust is a horrible issue, as you learned personally, and you don't have any water to wash it away with? You know, what do you do in those environments? There's a lot of learning we're going to have to do. And I think it's a lot easier to do that on a planetary surface, even at 1/6 gravity, than to learn everything, in 0 gravity, which we know is unhealthy, and being years away from rescue. So I'm a big fan of mine the moon first, the asteroids come later. So.
Yes, another question up there?
One thing that we keep talking about, a company making a discovery, getting a claim, or filing a claim, getting a discovery, getting tenure, getting an exploitation license. And this is not, and we keep talking about a single company doing this. This isn't a model that we use on the U.S. very often. You have one company that goes out, explores, finds it,
Yeah.
and then they sell that, and they get a credit from the buyer for the value they've added. Somebody else takes it to feasibility level and sells it, and they get a credit in selling that, and then finally somebody will develop it. So I think a model of making a claim, proving it, proving the discovery, carrying it forward, and using that. You talked about building the deep sea mining machines. So somebody invested $500 million, and their claim didn't work out. They've got a $500 million machine to sell to somebody. Their value has not gone to zero. So that this concept of value added step by step, I think, is something that has to be built into the law.
Well,
I think
the law needs.
It's inherently there.
Yeah, the law needs to acknowledge it. I suspect that that sort of value-added economy is representative of a mature market. I think in an early market where there's still people who don't believe that you can do this or don't believe you can do it economically, it's going to be hard to sell those matured rights until somebody's taken it all the way through. And my guess is, and it is a guess, I could be wrong, my guess is that first all the way through is going to be one company. And then people can start carving up pieces of the pie. But there's still a lot of skepticism out there. I get giggled at a lot when I talk about this stuff. So.
Yeah, well, I think essentially we're talking about at what point in time or investment can you really say that some form of tenure has been acquired? Because I think that once you do that, you're going to establish a right to compensation, if you will, for the value added that you've made. Because that's typically what prospectors and mineral exploration companies do, is that they go out and they define that they have some sort of resource there, and it is the value of that information that they've acquired. Now, I think that the important thing is, in going forward, is that at the end of the process, are you going to truly have something that is going to be exploitable at a profit? And I think that's the point where you have perfected your rights of tenure. But I think that we probably really need to establish some way of creating the first instance of a tenure right on a claim to lunar resources.
But at any place along that path that you just described, somebody else may see value and come in and purchase whatever that value of what has been done to that point, and then
Right.
carry it on.
Right.
The thing about the claim regime has to recognize and require that any new purchaser is obligated under the same terms as the original purchaser within that claim regime.
Yes.
I think another
And that's the way it is today.
Another thing to understand is, particularly in the context of projects being sold on, is that these regimes of tenure exist within some very severe commodity cycles and economic cycles.
Exactly.
And so your tenure
The
has
big
to
copper.
be. Yes. Well, I'm not going to get a bonus.
But I grew up watching those cycles.
Right.
So there has to, in order to encourage development, your tenure has to be stable and persistent enough that it can survive inevitable
Good point.
commodity cycles.
Excellent point.
And I, honestly, I think that one of the worst things that happened in the sale of intermediate developed properties is the idea that a lot of the sellers have retained royalties in the eventual production. And so I think that what you're doing is you're, in many respects, destroying the potential value of that. So I think that we're going to have to make sure that the projects are relatively clean when they get to the areas or to the stage of ultimate development.
Good point. Other questions?
Do you have any other questions out there? Yes.
It's kind of a silly question, but when we went to the moon, we were in the middle of a Cold War or a hot war.
Yeah.
It was very expensive. So why did we go to the moon? Why did we go to the moon?
It was a significant part, both in Eisenhower's mind, although it's not recorded as well, and in Kennedy's mind, an important part of countering the psychological advantages, apparent advantages that the Soviet Union had put on the table with Sputnik. It was purely a geopolitical play, and it paid off. It was a hell of a gamble to say, let's leapfrog what they're trying to do. And Kennedy basically asked, is there any project that we have a chance to succeed that would would jump over, in a sense, claim jump, the Soviet Union? And that became Apollo. Now, fortunately, Eisenhower, in January of 1960, personally sent a letter to T. Keith Glennon, his administrator of NASA at the time, ordering him to begin the development of what was then called the Super Booster. And that ultimately became the Saturn V with the addition of one more engine. And had that not started in 1960, Kennedy would, goal of the end of the decade, even with the accident that we had, probably could not have been made. But nevertheless, it was a very important part. The interesting thing is, the only place you find a record of the importance of that is in Glennon's diary. Eisenhower never talked about it, but that was his basic decision, was to build a Saturn V, because it had no military purpose.
None, yeah.
It had a psychological purpose, had no military purpose. The military purposes of missiles at the time were being developed, again, by his decision, independently by the services, because they had different missions.
Yep.
So, and then Kennedy picked that up. Now, he also had the advantage of the Space Task Group having been operative at Langley under Bob Gilruth's leadership. And they had already been looking at the potential of going to the moon. George Low in particular had been looking at lunar orbit missions, but they had a lot of fundamental thought that had gone into, plus they had the managerial experience of the X-15 program, which was what they really built on in order to ultimately create a management environment that made Apollo successful. That's the big concern I have today, is the absence of that kind of management environment in NASA. And it really was required in order to make Apollo successful. Now, Apollo went through some bad times, but by the peak of the program, that management environment was capable of launching a Saturn V class mission every 2 months between November 1968 and November 1969. That's absolutely unbelievable today. You couldn't do that today because that management environment's not there. Sorry.
No.
Obviously, I've talked about that before.
Based off your answer, so is that what it's going to take? A psychological impetus, or like some sort of event where China or Russia, extracts like an ounce of gold or platinum and brings it back, and then shows the world that, hey, we can do this. Now America has to step up and do it on a bigger scale.
I don't think so. I think the geopolitical impetus for NASA is going to be is already there. And I think this administration recognizes it. I'm not sure the Congress recognizes it yet, or other people do. Certainly the media doesn't. But the Cold War type atmosphere already exists. And for a national program, separate. The national program, I don't think, is a resource program. They add information. They have done the discovery. But I don't expect the national government to ever produce resources on the moon. I mean, number one, I don't think government does that very well. At least our government wouldn't. And that's the private sector's job, is to make that happen. The government has to create an environment in which it can happen, but I don't expect the government to be responsible for the production of resources. China has already laid down the gauntlet, in my opinion. And so that justifies a national effort. What now has to happen is that effort has to be properly managed to be successful.
But to add on to that, and you're exactly right, the way to do it this time, and I'm going to face the camera, not over my shoulder, the way to do it this time is to not to try to replicate Apollo as a space program, but to use the lessons we've learned in the last 40 years to build a space industry, of which government effort will be a part of that, private sector will be a part of that, NGOs may wind up being a part of that, but by building an industry, you get the resilience and the creativity which you can't do in a single top-down managed program. In the 60s, that's what we needed. In the next 60 years, that's not what we need, and I hope that's not what we do. I hope we're enabling industry to go off and, there's multiple different companies building moon landers now, and they look very different. These are robotic, not crewed, but let them all try. Don't pick one. Don't do a down select. Let them all fly, and the market will tell us which ones work.
Well, the environment definitely has changed. In the Apollo era, NASA was the manager.
Right.
Although a large majority of the 450,000 people involved were contractors. And industry was contractor and absorbing technology at the same time that they were contracting NASA. That has reversed itself with most of the new technologies that will be applicable to going back to the moon, whether private or public, are coming out of the private sector. And NASA's challenge today, unlike Apollo, is to manage the integration of those new technologies, whether it's a new rocket or a new computer or what have you, integration of those so they can get that job done. But what I'm talking about, a management environment, is a national environment in which you have mostly young people involved, because they don't know how to fail yet.
Right.
I watched that. Two, you have Congress and the OMB have agreed to a management reserve sufficient to take care of the unknown unknowns and stay on schedule. That's those two things are probably the major things that made Apollo successful, were young people and a management reserve. Jim Webb, Kennedy's administrator of NASA, doubled the estimates of his engineers on what it would cost. So we had essentially 100% management reserve to accomplish Apollo, and we used all of it because we didn't know everything we were going to encounter, including accidents.
And you look at the reverse of that, which is what we've done, and here I'm talking robotic missions, with something like James Webb, the James Webb Telescope, not James Webb the individual, where they would run into those troubles and not have any reserve, and then have to kick it over into the next fiscal year, and then to do it again, and then do it again. And so now that telescope is years late and billions over budget. So it's a different environment.